Realize that the gospel's for all mankind, but it demands real men. It's for men, it's for men, it's for men, it's for kingdom men. Woo!
Well, that was my son, Jonathan Evans. He serves as chaplain of the Dallas Cowboys. And, you know, we're football fans. And you know, every time there's a football game, there's a clash, there's a conflict. Two teams are fighting each other. But then there's introduced this third team, this team of officials. They're on the field, but they're not of the field. They're in the middle of the mess, but they're not part of the mess because they belong to another kingdom. 345 Park Avenue in New York, that's the NFL offices. They have representatives on the field of play. Their job is to represent the kingdom in New York in the chaos on the field. They don't belong to either team because they represent a king and a different kingdom. Their job is to take the book that they have received from the office and make all calls on the field based on that book. Not based on how they feel, not based on what they want, not even based on what the crowd thinks. They know sometimes they're going to be cheered. They know sometimes they're going to be booed. But that's irrelevant because they're there to rule by the book on the field in the middle of the chaos. You and I are in a chaotic world today. We're in racial chaos, social chaos, political chaos, class chaos, political and police and community chaos. But God is looking for a group of men, his officiating crew, who will be in the mess but not a part of the mess, who will bring the response of the kingdom up there in the chaos down here. But the problem we face is that too many men have joined the teams on the field who are in conflict. Whenever you see a football game, you can see that the referees have their own distinct identification, black and white jerseys. You don't confuse them by being on either side because they don't represent either side. They represent another king and another kingdom. But what we have today are too many men who've abdicated their role of being kingdom men and have become cultural men, even cultural Christians. And as a result, we are descending into chaos. God created the man, the male first. Why did he create Adam before he created Eve? Because Adam was to lay the foundation for everything else that was supposed to be built in the culture. And when Adam failed, God never says that the world has fallen apart because of Eve. It says in Adam all die. Why? Because the man was going to be held responsible for family, church, and culture. And when the man collapsed, God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He never says, I am the God of Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel. Not because those ladies weren't critical, but because men were ultimately responsible. What is a kingdom man? A kingdom man is a male who has learned to progressively live all of his life under the lordship of Jesus Christ, where the king up there rules his life down here. But unfortunately, today we have a generation of Benedict Arnold, men, or males rather, who have not learned what it is to live all of life under God's rule. And when that happens, the culture's in trouble. As I've said in years gone by to Promise Keepers, if you're a messed up man and you have a family, you're going to contribute to a messed up family. If you're a messed up man contributing to a messed up family and your messed up family goes to church, then your messed up family is going to make its contribution to a messed up church. A messed up man contributing to a messed up family resulting in a messed up church, if your church is supposed to be the light to the neighborhood, well then your messed up church is going to create and contribute to a messed up neighborhood. A messed up man contributing to a messed up family, resulting in a messed up church, causing a messed up neighborhood. If that neighborhood's part of the city, well, then that messed up neighborhood will make its contribution to a messed up city. A messed up man contributing to a messed up family, resulting in a messed up church, causing a messed up neighborhood that now resides in a messed up city. If that city's part of a county, well, then that messed up city is going to make its contribution to a messed up county. A messed up man contributing to a messed up family, resulting in a messed up church, residing in a messed up neighborhood as part of a messed up city, contributing to a messed up county. If that county is part of the state, well, now that messed up county is going to make its contribution to a messed up state. A messed up man contributing to a messed up family, resulting in a messed up church, residing in a messed up neighborhood, because it's contributing to a messed up city that's part of a messed up county that's in a messed up state. If that state's part of the country, well, now that messed up state's going to make its contribution to a messed up nation. A messed up man contributing to a messed up family, resulting resulting in a messed up church, causing a messed up neighborhood that resides in a messed up city, that's part of a messed up county, contributing to a messed up state, residing in a messed up nation. That nation's part of the world. Well, now that messed up nation's gonna make its contribution to a messed up world. So, if you want a better world composed of better countries inhabited by better states, made up of better counties, composed of better cities, inhabited by better neighborhoods because they've been illuminated by better churches, composed of better families, we're right back where we started. We need a generation of better men. We call them kingdom men. What's a kingdom man? 3 times a year, Exodus chapter 34, verses 23 and 24, God called all the males in Israel, leave the women at home. He just wanted the males. He called all the males in Israel. And he said to all the males in Israel, want you to come and I want you to meet with me. I'm going to define your humanity. I'm going to define your manhood. He uses 3 different Hebrew words for God. He uses Elohim, Adonai, and Yahweh. Elohim is God's power name. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Yahweh is his relational name. It's his covenantal name. It's where he enters into relationship. And then there is Adonai. That means your boss, your supervisor, the one who tells you what to do. He's your dictator. He says, I want you to come and I want you to meet with me in all 3 names. Why? Because if you want to see my power, Elohim, you got to be in relationship, Yahweh, and I have to have the right to tell you what to do, Adonai. And he says, if I can get all the males to meet with me, I'll save you, your families, and your nation. In Exodus chapter 23, verses 17 to 31, he says, if I get all the males to meet with me, I'm going to take care of your prosperity, I'm going to take care of your nation, and I'm going to take care of you. But the problem is, he can't get men to meet with him. He can get them to go to church, but that's not what he means. He means to rule over your life. So what's a kingdom man? A kingdom man is a male who has consistently learned to live all of life, not part-time Christian, but full-time saint, all of life under the authority of Jesus Christ. I love Genesis chapter 18, verse 19, because it gives us a few principles for how men need to rise to the occasion. Our nation is falling apart. Our families are falling apart. Our churches have become weak. Why? Because men have become missing in action. They've come to this soft definition of Christianity, as Jonathan explained, this soft gospel rather than this radical commitment to Jesus Christ and their Christian faith. And as a result, we're not having the influence and the impact. It's not just because there's wickedness out here, it's because there's weakness in here, that men have abdicated their role. God tells Abraham in Genesis 18, verse 19, number 1, I have chosen you. You know what he's telling him? You've been drafted. Every man has been drafted by God to act on God's behalf in history to bring heaven down to earth. Our job as a draftee in God's program is to represent him in every area of life. One of the problems is we have far too many men who don't know they've been drafted. They've never been rightly defined. It may not even be that man's fault. Maybe he was raised in a matriarchal society. Maybe his daddy was a Rolling Stone, and he has not been defined by God properly, and therefore he doesn't know he's drafted, so he's either sitting on the bench or he's withering in the stands because he doesn't know what the game plan is for him on the field. Far too many men are like the man who said, I was dying to finish high school so I could go to college. Then I was dying to finish college so I could get married and start a family. Then I was dying to get my career on target. Then I was dying for my kids to grow off and get 18 and leave. Then I was dying to retire, only to discover now I'm just dying because I still don't know why I was put here. All of those other things are important, but they should all fall under God's governmental rule, under God's kingdom assignment. And if you're not fulfilling your kingdom assignment to rule on God's behalf in history, with love, with care, but with clarity, then you and I are failing as men. Men, you have been drafted. You have been called by God to represent him in human history. And history will be ultimately determined by whether men pick up that assignment. You know, when you're building a building, the very first thing you've got to do is what? Pour a foundation. Doesn't matter how nice the doors, the windows, and the roof happen to be. If the foundation is weak, everything else built on it is in trouble. Foundations don't have to be fancy or pretty, but they do have to be strong. And what God is looking for is a group of strong men who love God, who are committed to Him and apply consistently His principles in history as His representatives in time and space. Because if something goes wrong with the foundation, everything resting on it is in trouble. And that's why Satan is coming after men, because he knows if he can remove the man from his bibliocentric kingdom role in history, then everything else that's banking on him is going to become destabilized and shaky too. So he says, first of all, I have chosen him. I have selected him. I have drafted him for a kingdom purpose. The second thing he says is that Abraham is to raise his children by his example in righteousness and justice. He's a family man responsible for raising his kids. I don't know if you know this, man, but in the Bible, it is the man's job to raise the children, not the woman's job. Ephesians 6 says, fathers, raise your children. You say, but wait a minute, I gotta work, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. That's why he's giving you a helpmate. Her job is to help you, not replace you. It is the father's job to lead in devotions. It is the father's job to make sure discipline is the home. It is the father's job to make sure that they're not hanging out with the wrong people. Your wife comes along, your mate comes along to assist you, not replace you. The Hebrew word is ezer kenigdo. I'm going to give you, Adam, a woman suitable to you, to correspond with you, to come in assistance beside you, but she cannot replace you. We have far too many men who've been domesticated or neutered. They're walking around with jerseys with other men's numbers on them because they don't have a number of their own. What God is calling you for is to stand up and take ownership. We have a generation of children who do not have leadership. It's like walking through those old magnetometers. You remember those old magnetometers when it would go beep, beep, beep if you had a metal in your pocket. I went through one time. I had metal in my pocket. It beeped. I went through it another time. I had metal in my pocket. It didn't beep. You know why? Because you could set them at different levels of sensitivity. Well, what we've got is a generation of young people whose consciences haven't been set because daddy didn't set it, and so the conscience doesn't go off. And so as a result, they come up with their own conclusion of life and meaning and dignity and sexuality and a point of reference given them by the culture, not given them by their fathers. It was the father who would train the children, teach the children. It would be inconceivable in biblical days that the wife would have to wake up the husband and ask the husband, are you going to church today? Why? Because he was responsible for corporate worship. It is the father's job to lead the children around the table. The Bible says in Psalm 128 verse 3 that a man raises his children around the table. Why? Because the dinner table is not just for eating, it's for leading. It's where you bless your children, pray for your children, correct your children, lead your children, inspire your children. You turn off the television and the smart devices and the telephones, and you own that time. Why? Because this is daddy's time to lead, and make no mistake about it. Joshua 24:15, as for me and my house, as for me and my house, as for me and my house, this is how we roll, and there is no vote taken. Why? Because the leader of the house, under the rule of God, is making sure that God is calling the shots in this home. And when you take that position in kindness, in love, but with responsibility, then you'll begin to see your wife take shape, your children take shape. It may take a minute if you failed along the way, but if you will be consistent with it and not a rolling stone, not in today and out tomorrow, if you'll take consistency with it, then you'll be able to see God reshape your environment because now you're operating under his rule. He says, I have chosen you. He says, I want you to teach your kids two things, righteousness and justice. We have a battle in our culture today. We've got some people teaching righteousness, some people arguing justice, when the Bible says in Psalm 89 verse 14, from his throne comes righteousness and justice. You don't seesaw the two, where you emphasize righteousness in the womb, but you skip justice to the tomb. No, you have righteousness and justice on an equal playing field. These are twin towers joined at the hip. These are Siamese twins. Your children need to know to judge judge people justly by the content of the character, not the color of the skin. They need to know righteous standards of moral integrity, and daddy is to teach them both. And if we would ever get the men to take this responsibility, then we could quell the chaos and confusion in the culture, because God's army has come together to demonstrate what God can do when he has a group of men to work through. Ezekiel 22, verse 30 says, I would save the culture if I could find me a man. But God says, I looked all around the culture and I couldn't find me a man, so I had to curse the culture. Now, there were plenty of males in Israel. He could go to plenty of males biologically, so evidently you can be a male and not yet a man. Because he says, I can see some males, but I can't find a man. I can't find a man who will come under and submit to my authority consistently. Let me tell you how radical Abraham was. Abraham was so radical, according to the end of Genesis chapter 17, he was so radical that he got all the men in his household circumcised. He didn't just take care of his sons. It says he got his sons circumcised, but he took care of all the men in his household, because he wasn't just a man who was going to influence his children. He was going to influence every man who was under his sphere of authority. God has called you to become a full-time disciple, not just a fan sitting in the stands. And he wants you to influence not only your family, but all the men you run in contact with. To be circumcised meant you were put under the covenant. It meant you were under the covering of God. It's like having an umbrella. When it rains, you take an umbrella. But if the umbrella is closed, you still won't get wet even though you possess the umbrella. The covenant is an umbrella. But when you operate underneath it, because God is over top of it, submitting to his rule, it still may rain in the culture, but you don't get wet. Why? Because you're setting a different standard under the rule of God. He says, Abraham, I have drafted you. You have a divinely designed destiny. He says you are for discipleship. You're to disciple your family and every other man. Every man should be connected with other men who are operating under the rule of God or who wish to operate that way, so that you're accountable and responsible for the biblical definition of manhood. Then finally, he says, the reason I'm doing this is so that you might have dominion. He says at the end of verse 18 of Genesis chapter, end of verse 19 of Genesis chapter 18, he says, the reason I'm telling you this is so that I may bring upon Abraham all that I had promised him. Now, what did God promise Abraham? He says in a few verses earlier, I'm going to make you a great nation. Guess where Abraham was? He was in the vicinity of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah was a nation under judgment. It was under judgment for moral decay, and it was under judgment for social decay. It was absence of righteousness, and the Bible says in Ezekiel that it was absence of social justice. It says both were collapsing the culture. The culture was falling apart. He says, but Abraham, if I can get you to be my man, we're going to build us a nation that can work. Our nation is collapsing due to unrighteousness and injustice. But if God can ever get his men, he can rebuild a nation. You ever see when there's a football game and the home team gets in that circle and they put their arms around each other and they say, this is our house. This is our house. This is our house. Dominate, dominate, dominate. What they're saying is we're going to control the agenda here. And although we're going to be opposed by this visiting team, this is our house. Well, this is God's house. And we want to make sure that we're influencing what happens on the field of play. It's time for men to go for maximum impact. You know, bowler is not known for their style. They're known for their impact. No matter how nice they look, no matter how new the ball is, how new the bag is, they're measured by how many pins fall down. So you can be looking smooth as silk, but if the pins are still standing, you have failed miserably. Well, we have got a lot of good-looking men, but the pins are still standing because we're not having an impact in the culture. How can we have all these men who go to church, who say they're Christians, who name God's name, but the pins are still standing? That's because we're not bowling right, even though we may be looking churchified, speaking Christianese. What we need are some radical kingdom men who are now determined to represent God in the marketplace. This is not a time for delay because the hour is too late. If this keeps going like it's going, you will not have a country worth living in. No more excuses. You know, in every football game, there's only 17 minutes of actual contact. 17 minutes. But that 17 minutes is part of a 1-hour game. So the game is 1 hour, but you're only going to see 17 minutes or so of contacts. But that 1 hour is part of a 3-hour experience. So you're going to sit 3 hours to watch 1 hour so you can see 17 minutes. But then you're going to take a couple of hours to get to the game to deal with traffic, parking, and walking to the stadium. So now it's 5 hours where you'll sit 3 hours to see 1 hour so you can watch 17 minutes. But now it's going to take you 2 more hours to get back home, to get back from the stadium into the car, work through the traffic, get back home. So it's 7 hours where you set 3 hours to see 1 hour so you can watch 17 minutes. On top of all that, you're going to tithe to get into the game. Then when you get home, you're going to look at Sports Center or you're going to look at NFL Network to watch what you just saw at the game. Then when you go to work tomorrow, you're going to discuss what happened at the game and who they're going to play next week. In other words, that football game will own your life all week long because you're committed to your team. Now, help me out. What has your team done for you lately? What has your team contributed to you lately? But God has created you. He's made you a man. He's called you to represent him in your life, in your family, in your church, and in the culture. And you just gonna give him an hour or 2 a week and say you've done your Christian duty when you give a ball team your whole week? It's now time to give God unreserved commitment. This is not a time for spiritual punks. This is not a time for spiritual chumps. This is not a time for guys who are not willing to take their stand, who are too lame to man up for Jesus Christ. We've got people manning up for everything else. It's time to stand up for our love for the Lord, commitment to the Lord, relationship with the Lord, and submission to the Lord. And when we get that kind of radical Christianity, we can see transformation, impact, and change occurring in our land, in our families, in our churches, and in our cultures. Now, I know some of you men have said, but boy, you hit me with too much. I've already messed up. I done messed up at home. I done messed up at church. I don't have a witness in the culture. I'm a secret agent Christian, spiritual CIA representative. I'm a covert operative. I done messed up. Is it too late for me? Well, I've got good news for you. My wife, when she was living, she cooked some awesome meals, and particularly on Sunday, she made these huge, big meals, these staggeringly large meals. Okay, and we'd eat these big meals on Sunday. But see, she wasn't going to do this on Monday, so she took the leftovers from Sunday, she put it in Tupperware. She was the Tupperware queen. Put it in the refrigerator. She would bring it out on Monday, and she'd reconfigure the leftovers from Sunday. One time I saw her take leftovers, put it in a casserole dish. She grated some cheese, sprinkled grated cheese over the leftovers in the casserole dish. She took some cream of mushroom, poured it over the cheese that was over the leftovers in the casserole dish, put it in the oven, brought it out, put it on the table. Shucks, that was the best stuff I ever had in my life. You know what it was? It was a masterpiece. It was a masterpiece because it was leftovers in the hands of a master. So God can take your leftover life. He can take your failures and mistakes, mix it together, and put a little cream of Holy Ghost over it, and he can still serve you up a life worth living. Not only give you a better future, but give you some of the years that the locusts have taken away. In closing, if you will go buy some checkers, you'll notice something. On the top of each checker is a crown. You know why? Because each checker was created to become a king. Each checker was created to go to the other side of the board in order to be crowned, in order for it to become a king. And when it becomes a king, it can make moves it couldn't make before. It has authority it didn't have before because it has now been crowned. But you notice that the only way it's going to make it from its created start to what it was created to be is if it submits to the hand that is directing it. Because the hand knows the moves that need to be made against the enemy that's trying to jump it to stop it from being crowned. Mister, God created you to be crowned. He created you to be his representative in history, to be crowned as a kingdom man. But Satan is out there trying to jump you and take you off the board. But if you'll submit to the rule of God, he'll know how to maneuver. He'll know how to jump over the evil one so that when you get to the other side, you can be crowned as his kingdom representative to a culture that is desperately in need. I challenge you to not be satisfied to be a male. It's time for us to become kingdom men rising.